Berlin Blockade, June 24, 1948 through May 12, 1949, was one of the first major international crises of the Cold War. During the multinational occupation of post-World War II Germany, the Soviet Union blocked the Western Allies' railway, road, and canal access to the sectors of Berlin under Allied control. The Soviets offered to drop the blockade if the Western Allies withdrew the newly introduced Deutschmark from West Berlin. In response, the Western Allies organized the Berlin Airlift to carry supplies to people in West Berlin, Germany. Air crews from the United States Air Force, the British Royal Air Force, the Royal Canadian Air Force, the Royal Australian Air Force, the Royal New Zealand Air Force, and the South African Air Force flew over 200,000 flights in 1 year, providing up to 4,700 tons of necessities daily, such as fuel and food, to the Berliners. The Soviets did not disrupt the airlift. By the spring of 1949, the airlift was clearly succeeding, and by April it was delivering more cargo than had previously been transported into the city by rail. On May 11, 1949, the USSR lifted the blockade of Western Berlin. The clash ultimately led to the division of the country into East and West, and the division of Berlin itself. June 18, 1948, announcement of the new Deutschmark, Soviet guards halted all passenger trains and traffic on the Autobahn to Berlin, delayed Western and German freight shipments, and required that all water transport secure special Soviet permission. On June 21st, the day the Deutschmark was introduced, 1948, the Soviets halted a United States military supply train to Berlin and sent it back to Western Germany. On June 22nd, the Soviets announced that they would introduce a new currency in their zone. This was known as the Ostmark, spelled O-S-T-M-A-R-K. As for the decision for an airlift, although the ground routes had never been negotiated, the same was not true of the air. On November 30th, 1945, it had been agreed in writing that there would be 3 20-mile-wide air corridors providing free access to Berlin. Enforcing this would require an airlift that really worked. If the supplies could not be flown in fast enough, Soviet help would eventually be needed to prevent starvation. General Lucius D. Clay was told to take advice from General Curtis LeMay to see if an airlift was possible. When the American forces consulted Britain's Royal Air Force about a possible joint airlift, they learned that the RAF was already running an airlift in support of British troops in Berlin. General Lucius Clay's counterpart, General Sir Brian Robertson, was ready with some concrete numbers. During the lift earlier that year, British Air Commander Reginald Waite had calculated the resources required to support the entire city. On June 24, 1948, General Curtis LeMay appointed Brigadier General Joseph Smith Headquarters Commandant for USAFE at Camp Lindsay as the Provisional Task Force Commander of the airlift. On June 25, 1948, General Lucius Clay gave the order to launch Operation Vittles. The next day, 32 C-47s lifted off for Berlin, hauling 80 tons of cargo, including milk, flour, and medicine. The first British aircraft flew on June 28th. At that time, the airlift was expected to last 3 weeks. However, the operation lasted for 11 months and 2 weeks. The Berlin Airlift Monument in Berlin Tempelhof displays the name of the 39 British and 31 American airmen who lost their lives during the operation. Similar monuments can be found at the military airfield of Weizenbruch near the former RAF Silly, and of course, here at Rhein-Main Air Base outside of Frankfurt, Germany. The inscription reads, "They gave their lives for freedom of Berlin in the service of Berlin Airlift 1948/49.
Endless cars of vitally needed coal are stalled by the Russian blockade of Berlin. But that is only part of the story. As the red noose is drawn closer about the western sector of the capital, switches are pulled on generators, and the fuel famine forces drastic power cuts. Berlin becomes a city of darkness as all ground communication is severed and industry comes to a standstill. But the Western Allies fight back with an airlift of 450 flights daily, carrying thousands of tons of food into the beleaguered capital, flying an air corridor threatened by red fighter planes. Backing up the shuttle are 60 B-29s, which arrive at an airfield in England, a base from which American planes once bombed Germany. Now these Yanks may fly on a mission of mercy, the feeding of hungry Germans in Berlin. These are the men whose nerve-wracking job it may be to fight their way through weather and red obstruction. So grave is the crisis that General Clay is recalled to Washington to report on the situation. He is greeted by Secretary of the Army Royal and then is welcomed by Chief of Staff Omar Bradley. On his shoulders may rest the responsibility for peace or war, and the Commander-in-Chief at the White House awaits his appraisal of the most explosive situation yet in the struggle between East and West.